one of the owners of Twist and Shout. I have been since 1988. Music has been the driving force in my life since the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan. It truly did change my life. And as a teenager and then a young adult, it's really all I cared about. And then I was lucky enough to land at Twist and Shout and find my purpose in this world. First band I've picked out to tell you about, one of my favorites from the 60s, Traffic. This is my favorite album by them. It's called Traffic. Although they have 4 or 5 albums that are completely superb that I recommend. It is, you may notice, young Steve Winwood before he was a AAA star on the radio. He was, at this point, the most soulful singer in England, and he was the creator of some of the most sophisticated, interesting rock and roll to come out of this era. John Barleycorn and Low Spark are close to being equal with this album, but for me, every single song on this is, well, every single song on those albums is great too, but every single song on this one holds a really special place in my heart. And then there are songs that kind of transcended Traffic, like Pearly Queen, Feeling Alright, 40,000 Headmen, that other people covered, and they kind of became standards of the 60s. But for me, it's just every single song on this album, and the instrumentation is everything I want out of cool rock and roll. Next up, I have a modern band, my favorite of probably all the modern bands. This is Spiritualized, run by Jason Pierce, once a member of Spacemen 3, and then he went on to form this group, and they're still around, still making records. This is their album, Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space, which came out in 1997, 9 years into the store's history. I already loved them. I already loved Spacemen 3, but when this album came out, I just felt like this is the kind of reaching, huge, produced album that Sgt. Pepper's was, or Satanic Service. I mean, it just has that huge, gigantic, produced kind of 60s psychedelic sound that I love so much. And all their albums are good, but this is the one I recommend the most. Next up, I have my favorite folk singer of all time. He was a huge influence on Bob Dylan, who I don't consider a folk singer. He's a rock singer, or else he'd be my favorite folk singer of all time. But this is Fred Neal, and I brought you a few things. He was Dylan's, one of his very first appearances was with Fred Neal on stage in New York. He was hugely influenced by him, as many 60s artists were. You probably may know of him because he wrote a song called Everybody's Talkin', which then Harry Nilsson covered. He also wrote a song called The Dolphins, which has been covered by many, many people. He has this incredible, deep, resonant voice that's unlike anybody else. And as soon as it gets in your heart and your head, you won't ever forget it. It's a worldly, interesting form of folk. He's got a dark side to him, and his guitar playing is incredible. I really can't recommend him enough. Here's a couple. This is Bleecker and McDougall, with an incredible shot of him on this corner of Bleecker and McDougall in New York. This is a great compilation called The Many Sides of Fred Neal, which has most of his great stuff on it, plus some unreleased stuff. And this is a live from someone's apartment that just came out on Record Store Day, and then they released the CD afterwards, and really stripped down and interesting, something I've never heard from him before. And if you do find you're interested in him, a guy I know named Peter Neff wrote this book called That's the Bag I'm In, about Fred Neal, and he is a fascinating character who became famous and did not want to be. Next up, this is a series of CDs called Bear's Sonic Journals, which are part of the Owsley Stanley Foundation. Owsley Stanley was the LSD chemist in the 60s who was the Grateful Dead sound man. Many of the great live recordings from that era, from the Fillmore and so forth, were because of him. He's even more famous for his pioneering work as a chemist making LSD. He's dead now, but his son Starfinder Stanley has created the Owsley Stanley Foundation. Bears Sonic Journals have released, I don't know, somewhere close to 10 releases now. Every single one of them is special, interesting, fascinating. It's a study in both great music, the era, and sound production. And so I have 3 examples here of the things he's done. This is the most recent, this Johnny Cash one, and it's really interesting. It's recorded just a few weeks after the famous Folsom Prison concert, but he doesn't have his whole band. It's a very relaxed and interesting and different sounding Johnny Cash, but he does all the great material. 2 other ones I chose, New Riders of the Purple Sage, early in their career, when Jerry Garcia was still their pedal steel player, and they're just kind of learning their craft. It's fascinating to hear because they're just starting out. Also just starting out is this. It's called Before We Were Them, and it's Hot Tuna, before they had a name, Hot Tuna. Jorma Kaukonen and Jack Cassidy, the Jefferson Airplane, and this is early sets by them. Just this, you know, heavy-duty improvisational blues jamming. Can't recommend these enough. Next up, I have one of my favorite modern guys, Steve Gunn. He is a guy who is a fantastic singer-songwriter, even better guitar player, and he creates music that is ethereal and beautiful and soothing, and his guitar playing is unlike anyone else's. When you look at his discography, it's amazing how many different iterations this guy has played with different people, Kurt Weill and people from Sonic Youth, all different kinds of people. For me though, his solo albums that he made himself are the best, and I think he's getting better and better. This is his most recent one that came out this year, called Other You, and I recommend it highly. Let's switch to movies. Karel Zeman is a filmmaker, animator, genius who made film in Czechoslovakia and is a national treasure of Czechoslovakia, and his work is beyond description. If you like animation at all, if you like fantasy, if you like beautiful, seemingly impossible things on film, Karel Zeman is one of the missing links between early animation and things like Tim Burton and Terry Gilliam. Next, the greatest band touring in America now and for the last 20 years, Los Lobos. You've probably heard of them, you know about them. They got famous when they did the soundtrack to La Bamba, and I started liking them then. They were kind of a rootsy LA band from the same scene as X and the Blasters, so I immediately liked them. But starting with this record, Kiko and the Lavender Moon, which came out in 1992, they became something else altogether, and it's hard to describe exactly what it is. They are very connected to their Latino heritage. They do whole shows that are in Spanish that are wonderful on traditional instruments, but their rock and roll is totally intelligent, sophisticated, hard to describe, sometimes noisy, sometimes beautiful rock and roll, and everything about this band draws me, and there's something mysterious about them, and I really can't get enough. We are here in America. Let us pay tribute to the blues and Slim Harpo, one of the great blues guys of all time. Not as famous as Howlin' Wolf or Muddy Waters or Jimmy Reed, probably. Every bit as good, every bit as influential. Huge influence on the Rolling Stones and ZZ Top and a lot of those Zeppelin, a lot of those great kind of blues rock bands from the early 70s and late 60s. He never really got as famous as he should have. He wore big glasses and was maybe a little uncomfortable on stage, and he just didn't have the fame that Muddy Waters got and other guys got, but every bit as important, and I just recommend him so highly.
Why is supporting independent record stores more important than ever?
Well, I really encourage you to in this strange time in America to support any independent business that you can. For me, it's record stores and bookstores, you know, and restaurants. Those are the things that matter the most to me. But whatever you're looking for in our country, if you try to seek out something that's independently owned, in other words, that's owned by a person, not a corporation, I think you're doing something really important for America. I encourage you to seek out independent retail, no matter what you're looking for, and to remain independent in your thinking. You know, don't listen to everything that's spoon-fed to you by corporate interests. And that would be my my greatest hope for you.